You're listening to the Common Fan Podcast, a Husker football podcast for the common fan by the common fan.
Welcome back to the Common Fan Podcast. I am TJ Burkle, as always, alongside Matty Owens, Sr. and Geoff in Lincoln. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/@CommonFanGBR, so you can keep up with all the fun and frivolity right along with the Common Fans. You can also find us on Apple, Spotify, and all the major podcast streaming platforms. Hey, it's the offseason. There's plenty of intrigue, plenty of debates about how many games the Huskers might win, which players might be starters this year, maybe which quarterback might start for the Huskers this year, and on and on. But one thing all Husker fans can agree on is Nebraska's own certified Piedmontese beef. This premium Nebraska product is raised and grazed in the Nebraska Sandhills, and it is top-notch, Common fans. Visit your local Mercado Butcher Shop, 30th and Yankee Hill, or 84th and Havelock in Lincoln, and 162nd and Maple in Omaha. You can also check out cpbeef.com to get certified Piedmontese products shipped right to your front door anywhere in these United States. I know Geoff and Lincoln smoked some beef tips recently, and Sunday night at the Burkle home was New York strip night. It's all delicious. You can't go wrong. Get to your local Mercado Butcher Shop or visit cpbeef.com. Certified Piedmontese beef, fueling the Husker football team and fueling the Common Fan Podcast. Our next guest covers football and baseball for the Omaha World Herald. You're going to want to follow him for all the latest Husker news, Common fans. He's also a co-host of the Pick Six podcast, which is a favorite of the Common fans, alongside his World Herald colleagues, Sam McEwen and Tom Chattel. We are, of course, talking about Evan Bland. Evan, thanks so much for joining the Common fans today.
You got it, guys. How's it going today?
Going great.
It's going pretty well.
Good.
It's going pretty well. How are you?
Thanks for asking.
Thanks for having me. This is great. Love it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're excited to have you, and all the Common Fan listeners are excited to have you as well. So, Evan, one thing we know baseball season, college baseball season anyway, is in full swing now. This is a Husker football podcast, as is stated in our guiding principles and founding documents. But we have been granted a partial waiver from the Common Fan Board of Directors to ask a few baseball questions if there's time at the end. So we'll look forward to that. How long have you been at the World Herald now, Evan?
So I was a Nebraska grad in 2008 and caught on with the World Herald a few months after that. So I've been there since 2009 and did high school for a few years in Western Iowa. And so I've been covering Nebraska athletics. I mean, I did it in college back in the mid 2000s, but this is my 8th season doing it for football and baseball now.
So you were at the Daily Nebraskan?
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Yeah, it was great. I love the Daily Nebraskan. It was a great place to make mistakes and try different things. And the theme in the mid 2000s is the theme now, which was trying to get to a bowl game and transition. And the more things change, the more they unfortunately sort of stay the same in my experience.
Time is a flat circle, right?
That's right. Exactly. But it was great.
So you started covering the Huskers for the World Herald in what, 2016, 2017? Riley era?
2017, Riley's last year. Yep.
Okay. So, I mean, if you were at the Daily Nebraskan, you covered what, Callahan and Pelini, you covered Riley, Frost, now Coach Rhule. Would you kind of curious, like, what jumps out to you about Coach Rhule that's maybe different than other recent coaches, or maybe like another way to think about it is like, what has he done to make you believe that the Huskers are ready to win multiple Big Ten championships starting this year?
Well, I think the thing that Rhule does that to me is different from all the coaches that you mentioned is he's really comfortable in the fishbowl, right? You hear that term, being in the fishbowl, and not every college football program is going to have a Common Fan podcast or so much interest from outside. And so like, I think what we've seen at times, especially from some coaches that have come into Lincoln, maybe with not a lot of experience with Nebraska, is they just get a little uncomfortable with the attention. I think that's safe to say that was Bill Callahan's situation. He wanted to coach and he wanted to maybe not be the spotlight. Bo Pelini at times was very much resistant of some of the attention that comes with that. There was the hot mic issue and some of the other things that had come up. Mike Riley was more comfortable in that, but he was a West Coast guy who, even when he took the job, he said, this is going to be our last adventure of him and his wife. And so, there wasn't maybe that sense of urgency there as much. And then obviously with Scott Frost, he did come in with some baggage, quite honestly, about the fan base from when he was a quarterback there and getting benched and getting booed and all the things like that. So like you see Matt Rhule at pro wrestling events. You see Matt Rhule at storming the court at basketball games. You see Matt Rhule endorsing the local restaurants out there and the local adult beverages like that. These are things that really no Nebraska coach has ever done. And it's leveraging, I think, one of the greatest assets of Nebraska football, which is its fan base. He hasn't sort of shied away from that or tried to turn it. He embraces it, and I think that's truly who he is. If you talk to people from his stops at Temple and Baylor, like he wants to be a man of the people, and so I think that sort of thing sort of lets the football stuff breathe a little bit. It's maybe not quite as intense when you're talking about recruiting because he's out there and people kind of get him and get what he's all about. So I think it's sort of, it's never relaxing around here, but I think it has just sort of created a little bit more of a sense of ease that he's a guy that people can relate to. He's really smart if you talk to him. And I think he just really embraces this culture more than we've seen at Nebraska in a long time.
That's music to the ears of all Common fans.
Yeah, it's so I find it so refreshing. I mean, you hear some of our older Common fans, tell stories and spin yarn about Bob Devaney being belly up at the bar. And I don't know if Coach Rhule needs to go there, but I think that the Nebraska coach being kind of out in the public more and not having it being like, like you just saw Sasquatch, like I remember seeing Bo Pelini on a jog one time, around like 17th and K or something like that. And like, oh my gosh, it's Bo Pelini, so it's just see Matt Rhule. It's like, oh, there he is again. And it's kind of that, to me, it feeds into that his whole OOU one of us thing too. It's like, from the get go, I'm like, he's being genius about this. So creating this kind of huge family of Husker Nation, so to speak. And it sounds tacky, but
I said the same thing too about his Twitter game last year. Like just seeing the tweets he would put out about potential, and he did it in code too. He was using just emojis for like his tweets. And I love that because I was focused on him trying to figure out what he was trying to say. So he's good at PR. That's for sure. Public relations is his deal. I like the guy a lot.
Yeah.
I'm such a degenerate that I went back and looked and tried to see how long it took him to pass Scott Frost's tweet total when he was here. And it took him literally between like 2 and 3 weeks
to
eclipse what Scott Frost did in 5 years. Like he has fun with it.
For sure.
Well, speaking of Twitter and all the things that go on in the off season, we joke almost every off season. It feels like that we're the off season national champions. But seriously, could the Huskers have had a better off season to this point? I mean, to me, we did a great job recruiting. There's not really any staff turnover. They seem to have addressed just about every need that they've had.
For sure. I mean, there's a whole bunch of different areas you can point to. I mean, they kept Tony White through multiple rounds of schools being interested in him, most recently UCLA, which happens to be his alma mater. So they keep their staff intact, and that was huge. Just look at some of the roster retention. I mean, Ty Robinson coming back for another year. I don't think people could have counted on that ahead of time. Isaac Gifford, you can kind of go down the list with some players that they brought back. And then you look at the portal too, and it wasn't nearly maybe as big in terms of quantity of players, But I mean, you bring in a guy like Micah Mazuka, who's a multi-year starter at Power 5 programs, and hey, Nebraska has 2 openings at guard where he just so happens to play. You have obviously Dylan Raiola coming in, who makes the dramatic 11th hour flip from Georgia to Nebraska, and it just so happens that that was a position of true struggle. Let's just call it that for Nebraska last year.
It's a kind way to put it. Yeah.
And you know, I think some of the other portal pieces that they brought in, especially at receiver, Jamal Banks, Isaiah Nayor, Dante Dowdell at running back, I think could be the starter from day one. So like you're seeing an upgrade in talent, you're seeing the cultural foundation being set, and now you're just building on that. You're building on what you had. You kind of have a good sense of what the defense can be and was, while the offense you know, addressed all the areas that I think it could. Glenn Thomas, you know, from his resume and our chance to talk with him in the media, is going to be a good hire. I think that's structurally what they're looking for in terms of devoting somebody specifically to the quarterback position. So I don't know what you really look at this offseason and say, you know, that wasn't great. I think they hit on most of their recruits. There's a lot of momentum. Again, the culture piece is there. And now you kind of ride this wave of momentum here into spring ball, and we'll see where it goes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One question, as a common fan, and I bring this up, if you listen to our past episodes, Evan, you'll find that these two here could probably name the starting running back in 1982, as opposed to the 7th string running back in 1982. So they go pretty in depth and know their stuff. I myself am a just basic common fan. So I'm always curious, like when there's not on my television, when I'm not getting recruiting updates, I'm always curious about what the team's doing, what they're doing behind the scenes that I can't see. So, you know, signing day was a big one that everybody was focused on when Dylan committed to us. We all know about spring ball coming up in the next few months, school's in session, but what's the team doing right now? What are they focused on during this lull right now? Is it like winter conditioning, or what are they doing right now?
Yep, winter conditioning. They'll call it mat drills, which is essentially, you know, high intensity team competitive, different things that they do inside the Hawks Center. Oftentimes, this is when the strength coach really makes their money. I mean, this is when they're working with them daily in the off season. They're grinding in the weight room, pushing each other. You know, they got the rock music or the rap music on high. This is when guys are really pushing each other. And I think this is the time too when, and you hear Coach Rhule and some of the players talk about it, like this is when those leaders really emerge. You see who's competitive, you see who's at the front of the line, you see who's maybe not going to tolerate substandard effort, that sort of stuff. So like when you hear about the single digit numbers being voted on in fall camp, like that's the sort of stuff that the players are figuring out right now. And so it is kind of a different timeline a little bit for Nebraska this year. They're starting spring ball, I believe it's March 25th. So typically in the past it's been early March, but just because of a number of different things, how the portal falls this year and different things, it's a little bit later. So there was a period there where you know, players are kind of having to be self-motivated, do things on their own, but now they're in the full swing of the winter conditioning. So, you know, again, when you start hearing in a few months about how guys are bigger, faster, stronger than they've ever been, who's emerging as leader, like that's all what's happening right now. And that's kind of the irony of it is, you know, there's not a lot of reports right now coming out of the program just by the nature of it, but internally it's a really important time for the team to kind of figure out different roles for guys moving forward.
That's great. See, that's the stuff I like to hear, right? That's the stuff I don't get to see or don't get to know about. So thanks for that.
Yeah, sure.
Jeff, they're doing the same thing you're doing. They're lifting weights and like really like working out very, very hard.
Sure.
That's exactly what you're doing with your winter, I'm sure. Yeah.
I'm winter conditioning as well. You're correct.
Yeah. A lot of 12-ounce curls in the Langenberg house.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of the strength coach, Evan, it feels like every time we get a new head coach, they bring in a strength coach who is doing things nobody's done before. They're working harder than they've ever worked. And it's always like, well, we got this recruit. He may not be ready yet, but give him a couple years with, you know, insert strength coach's name and he'll be ready for the Big Ten kind of thing. And then the coach gets fired and we learn that the team wasn't even doing squats. just to use one example from the recent past. So from your vantage point, like, are you able to get a handle on, and I know it's kind of a lot fewer public events during winter workouts, but are you able to get a handle on like what they're doing, or like if or how it might be different from previous years? I mean, I do think we saw the culture and the foundation, which we talk about a lot in this program, feels like, it's going in the right direction. It's in a pretty good place after 1 year with Coach Rhule. And I'm sure the strength coach has a lot to do with that, going back to a year ago right now. But just kind of curious what your perspective is on that.
Yeah, oftentimes a strength coach, their process is sort of like a state secret. I mean, I remember with Zach Duval, I wanted to interview him many times over the years. I think he maybe did a radio interview or two during his time at Nebraska. And a nice guy, but he would always just say, this is about the players. It's not about me, which is kind of code in a way for saying, I don't want to get into my process and put that out there publicly, which is fine. And that's their right. What interests me with strength coaches is more of the general philosophy. Like, you have strength coaches who are going to try to bulk you up. You have strength coaches that will tailor their workouts differently, right? Like, the way that you're going to build up a lineman is going to be different from how you're going to try to build up a cornerback or whatever. And so kind of the approach is the thing that fascinates me now. And Matt Rhule, his track record has been recruit speed and then keep that speed and increase on that. And so, like, you look at how he had success at Temple and at Baylor, he was going head to head in recruiting battles with teams like Penn State at Temple and Texas at Baylor. And he would say that oftentimes you're not going to win those battles, but what you can do is you can find guys who are just as fast, who are maybe a little bit less refined as football players, and say, we're going to bring you in, we're going to develop the football aspect so that by the end, you're just as fast, if not faster, than the 4-star that we missed out on. And we believe that we've developed you to the point that you're actually a better player. And that translated over time at Temple and Baylor. And so I think with the strength aspect of that, that's been the focus, is how do we build these guys up, keep the explosion, keep the speed that they were recruited to. And so on the line, it's hey, let's get a big frame, get them stronger, get them more explosive. With the receivers, the skill position guys, it's been, let's tone you up, make sure that you're ready to take some hits, but also that you don't lose that speed that they brought you in on. So I think that's the emphasis, generally speaking. How they go about that is sort of varies, and I don't think they're going to put that out there publicly. But I think that general philosophy is the thing that can really sort of mark the strategy that this team's trying to take to, get to a bowl game, win the Big Ten, do all the things they want to do.
Absolutely. Speed is a good thing. Well, you kind of mentioned the quarterback play last year, Evan, and how it really left something to be desired. And even on this podcast, we were pretty critical of the offense last season. But we certainly got some reasons to hope that weren't there. Chief number one being Dylan Raiola. But the other one that you mentioned as well is Glenn Thomas, the new quarterbacks coach, co-offensive coordinator. Have you had a chance to meet Coach Thomas yet?
Yep, he spoke a week or so ago. We got to talk to him for about 25 minutes or so.
Okay. So in your opinion, what does he bring to the equation? We know the offense has to get better this coming season if we're going to take a step forward. How do you think he'll be able to help make that happen?
Well, his philosophy, as he has sort of laid it out, is meeting the quarterbacks where they are. And so it's going to be different for a true freshman than it's going to be for a junior or whomever. And so I think that's kind of where it starts. And then you look at his resume and you see he's pretty well equipped to do that. I mean, he's coached Matt Ryan with the Atlanta Falcons in the NFL for some of the best seasons that he had as a professional. And then a few years later at Arizona State, he's coaching true freshmen, 18 and 19-year-olds, and trying to get them built up, and had some success with that too. And so, he's got that breadth of experience. And so right now, you talk about what's going on behind the scenes right now. One of those things is the quarterback's coach is meeting with two guys who should be getting ready for their high school proms, and Daniel Kalen and Dylan Raiola, plus a guy in Heinrich Harburg, who, yeah, he started 8 games last year, but a year ago, 18 months ago, he wasn't even in the mix,
Right.
or in the coaching staff's plans at that time under Mickey Joseph and really Scott Frost. So, like, he's starting from scratch with this group, and I think in a lot of ways that's a good thing. Like, the timing of this is actually pretty ideal in my opinion, where you don't necessarily have a junior who's entrenched as the starter or whatever. You're starting fresh. Everybody's starting on the same page. You're able to build up your playbook in such a way that it matches up with the strengths of these guys. And so, I think that's all positive. And then just the demeanor of him too is different. I mean, you think about the quarterback coaches that Nebraska's had in recent years. Marcus Satterfield is a different guy, just personality wise, than Glenn Thomas. He's a lot more aggressive. He talked last year about wanting to have his quarterbacks put shoulders into guys. And he's different than Mark Whipple, and they're all much different than Mario Verduzco before him. So, like, there's just a lot of different personalities. I think Glenn Thomas is the most ball coach of those guys. He just wants to talk ball. He's not there to pontificate. He's not there to make us laugh. He's there to talk football. And I think that's the sort of thing that Nebraska really needs as it's working to shore up that position.
Love it.
Don't tell Common fans about the relative inexperience of the quarterback room, because it's 12-0 or bust in 2024. And that's going to be led by the quarterback play. Okay.
Let's do it.
Whatever you say, TJ.
That sounds good.
It's about
Let's
time.
go. TJ said it. So, kind of to piggyback off of what you're talking about with Owens there, just we have high hopes, obviously, for the offense this year, just with recruits we've picked up and transfers we've brought in. And as Owen said, we were a little bit critical. I shouldn't say a little bit. The Common fans ourselves were actually very critical of Marcus Satterfield and the offense last year. But it begs the question, from a pro like you and what you've seen and what you know, does he deserve all of that criticism, or was this always going to be a work in progress type situation that was going to take a little bit?
I think the first year of the offense, I mean, you talk about like letter grades. To me, it's an incomplete. Like, you just, in July, nobody was expecting that 2 months later, Nebraska would be running the option pitch like it's 1992. Like, you just, you wouldn't have expected it, right? Like, they had a vision for Jeff Sims. It didn't work out. So they tried to adjust to the strengths of the guys they had. And at the time, that was Heinrich Harburg, and they won some games and they got to the brink of a bowl game. But, like, yeah, I think it's just impossible to know exactly what the offense is going to look like moving forward. I mean, Matt Rhule's talked about making it positionless and having it look a little like the 49ers with some zone runs and, intermediate passes while you're taking an occasional shot downfield. But, like, it's just hard to know. And if you think back a year ago when he's putting his staff together, he wanted to hire a quarterbacks coach, and it didn't work out. And so he assigned the role to Marcus Satterfield, and Rhule's been very open back then and now. It's saying, like, that wasn't the original vision. And so they go out and hire a guy like Glenn Thomas, who has done that. And so I think that's part of it. I think just a general talent upgrade is part of it. Like, you're probably going to see fewer second guesses with a guy who can execute, a crossing pattern, or a guy who can find the completion instead of missing a guy, overthrowing him or missing him to the right or whatever. Like, I think a talent upgrade, and Matt Rhule's kind of joked about this, a talent upgrade is going to make the coaching staff and their decisions look a little bit better. And I thought the other interesting thing that he said was, when you look at Marcus Satterfield and his tendencies, like, he's a very aggressive play caller, and he's going to continue to be an aggressive play caller. But sometimes a quarterback, like, when they come off the field, what they need is a reminder to maybe ease up a little bit, or to look at something, as opposed to being super aggressive to it. And so I'm curious. I think that position shuffle, or that coaching shuffle, putting Satterfield on the tight ends, is a very natural fit for him. I think that the tight ends are going to do better from that. I think Satterfield is going to be more of a natural fit in that spot. And then you put Glenn Thomas in with the quarterbacks, who's more, I don't know if you want to say cerebral, but maybe just has more of a breadth of kind of the approach that he wants to take. And so I think that'll make things better too. So yeah, I mean, talent upgrade, a staff sort of reconfiguration to what they want. I think this will be kind of that first chance that we're going to see what this offense is like moving forward. And so I think, yeah, the judgments or the evaluations you make this coming year, to me, are going to be a lot more important than what we saw as they tried to piece it together last year.
Gotcha. I will say that you've mentioned no one could predict running the option. Pretty sure Matt predicted us running the option, didn't you, Matt? You've called that a couple of times.
Well, I don't want to put toot my own horn too much, but I think I more or less predicted the option pass, the belly
G option pass.
I mean, because we were already running the option, I said, well, now they got to run the option pass.
Yeah. We're fairly certain, T.O. was listening, and we reminded him. We reminded him of the belly G option pass, and then he recommended it to the
word got to Rhule. Yep.
And who was also listening, probably. Yeah.
Probably. He would qualify as the uncommon fan, right?
That's right. That's exactly
right.
Yeah.
Touche. Yes. Well played, sir.
All right, Evan. Game 1 against UTEP, August 31, 2024. Is Dylan Raiola the starting quarterback for the Nebraska Cornhuskers?
Yeah, I think so. And he's got to prove it. He's got to go out this spring and do it. He has to be a leader. He has to do all those things. But there's really been no indication to this point that he hasn't been. I mean, you even just look at what he's done in transfer portal recruiting. He was the guy who was shaking their hands, the visitors' hands, after Matt Rhule. You look what he did at the Polynesian Bowl. You look what he did his senior year in Georgia at a pretty good high school program where the high school football is competitive. I think he threw 1 interception, 30+ touchdown passes. So there hasn't been anything that to this point, I think, where you would pump the brakes, other than to say that when you look at some of the stars across college football in recent years, oftentimes they don't start as freshmen, or at least not right away. And they kind of can get their feet under them a little bit, and then they take off in that second half, or maybe as sophomores. But that's not Nebraska's situation. They needed somebody. They don't have a lot of veteran presence there. I think Heinrich Harburg will have a role in the offense. You think back to the opener last year when he caught a pass against Minnesota, and I think that signaled some intent that he has a speed and toughness that they want to get on the field. And then Daniel Kaelin, I think, has talent too. He was an elite 11 quarterback. You saw what he did out of Bellevue West, and then all you have to do is point to the history of Nebraska football recently and say, every year, the number 2 guy gets significant snaps. That's how it goes with injuries and life in the meat grinder of the Big Ten. So I think he probably plays a role at some point. But yeah, I mean, Raiola, with his pedigree, with the NIL resources that they undoubtedly sent his way, and just all the stuff he's shown this offseason, I don't see a situation where maybe he's not that guy on opening day.
Right.
Well, kind of pivoting then from offensive talk to defensive. We became gigantic fans of Tony White this last season. I think most Husker fans did. And he's really a rising star in the coaching business. Definitely worked wonders with our defense in year 1. And as we've kind of talked about, he's been a serious candidate for multiple jobs, most recently UCLA. He's probably going to be a head coach sooner rather than later, but we assume we're in the clear for 2024 at least. Do you think we can bank on him any more after this season? Do you think he'll stick around for more than just this 2024 season, or do you think it's probably he's going to be moving on?
I think the best bet is he'll probably have a head coaching job in the next 10 to 11 months. Would be my guess. I think that Nebraska was quite honestly lucky to keep him through this cycle. Especially, it was kind of weird because a lot of the jobs that came open, he had connections with, or were on the West Coast, like Syracuse, San Diego State, UCLA. Those were all programs that you could reasonably see him going back to. And so, I think if the defense next season does what it did last season, he'll be an obvious candidate for a lot of people, and not just because of the scheme and the on-field success, but you talk to him, he's got magnetic personality. He's well spoken. He's thoughtful. He doesn't have a huge ego, right? Like he'll go out of his way to say it's not his defense. It's the staff's defense, and that other assistants have brought things and elements to it that have helped it be what it is. But there's no doubt. I mean, he's the head guy. I mean, I talked with Ethan Piper a few weeks ago, and who's the outgoing offensive lineman, and he even said, after a year of scrimmaging and working against it every day, he's like, I still don't get what it's all about. And I think the tricky part, it's kind of two-pronged. Like on the one hand, you've got like these guys who are sort of defensive linemen, but they're sort of edge rushers and they're sort of linebackers, and so you don't know like where they're going, and then and they'll move around, and to hear Piper say it, he's like, sometimes they'll play it straight up, but then they'll do weird things and they'll move guys into different spots, and you don't know how to handle it. And pretty soon, as a blocker, you're more worried about like where the pressure is coming from and who is it going to be, and you're worrying less about just hitting the guy in front of you and creating a hole. So I think some of it's been about development for sure, but I think a lot of it too has been about just confusing the offense and not knowing where that stuff's coming from and getting opponents to think about what it is as opposed to reacting to it. It's just made them a step slower, and that's made the defense dynamic in the way it was. And so Tony White's the head of that thing. It'll be curious kind of what Nebraska would do if and when he does move on, if they promote from within or if they go try to find another 3-3-5 disciple. But for now, you enjoy him while he's here. You never know. Maybe it's not the right job in the next cycle. But certainly you're kind of on borrowed time with him at Nebraska. And at this point, I think you enjoy kind of what it is, and we'll see how long it lasts.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's pretty cool. Coach Rhule openly talks about wanting his assistants to go get head coaching jobs or go get bigger jobs. And he reportedly, at least, I can't remember if this was an actual news source or like message board geniuses or something, but reportedly was like putting in a good word with the folks at UCLA on behalf of Tony White.
Yeah.
Which I think is pretty, I don't know, it seems unique to me of a head coach to do. It's certainly like, it's not something he needs to do, and obviously would cause a disruption in his staff. He'd have to find a new coordinator, as you were just saying. But what does that tell you about Matt Rhule?
It tells me he walks the walk as much as he talks the talk. Like, first of all, like, yeah, you want your head coaches or your assistant coaches to move on. I mean, that just is the sign of a healthy program, one that grows. Like you look at Nick Saban's time at Alabama, he was replacing coordinators and assistants like every other year. So I think that's part of what you're looking for. But like the walk part to me it stands out, because like I think any coach would tell you, yeah, we want our guys to move on and I want the best for my staff and so on and so forth. But it is a different thing when you're the head coach and it's in February and your defensive coordinator, who you've had a ton of success with, is up for a job, and you proactively call the athletic director at the school and say, yeah, I think he would be a great hire. Oh, and by the way, that's at a school that is on your schedule next year, and that will probably be on your schedule for many years to come in the Big Ten. So like, I think there's a lot of, weight to something like that, and for sure. And, it's like two things can be true at once, right? Like you don't want to lose your guy, but at the same time, you want that guy to have what he does acknowledged, and you want to have that pay off. I think what I also think about that, though, is that Matt Rhule is really good at playing the long game. And so, yeah, you're going to lose Tony White at some point. What if you're another rising assistant coach somewhere and Matt Rhule calls you up and says, hey, you want to come to Nebraska? You can bet that they are going to be aware of the fact that he's going to stump for you and that he's going to help you advance in your own career. So like, yeah, there may be some short-term effects, consequences when you lose some guys, but I also think as we go along in Nebraska and Matt Rhule's time at Nebraska goes along, it's going to be really interesting to see what sort of assistance he's able to bring in when openings arise, just because of how much he has their backs. So we'll see. I do think there's some value in that. It's not something that you realize or can see right now, but I do wonder in a year or two what the value of that could end up being.
like that you said that Nick Saban and replacing assistants and coordinators. Maybe Matt Rhule can have his own. Maybe Nebraska will have their own quote unquote Matt Rhule coaching rehabilitation clinic, like Nick Saban does.
I thought you were going to drop in a Tommy Rees reference.
Well,
there,
I mean,
Jeff.
I'm trying to be humble. Tommy Rees, just real quick, Evan, I like Notre Dame too. And these guys give me shit about it all the time. But, Tommy Rees is a great coach. He's doing good things over there in Alabama. They'll be just fine, TJ.
Isn't he like an NFL tight ends coach now or something?
I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea. Real quick, just because I can't get through an episode without at least mentioning the CFIC. 18-year-olds tend to get a lot of pressure put on them when they start at a Power 5 conference school, especially one like Raiola, and how big of a land he was. He's been referred to the savior of the program. There's a lot of pressure there, kind of like LeBron James being the chosen one. Or in our case on the show, we refer to him as Luke Skywalker, where he has been sent to defeat the evil empire of the college football industrial complex. And we're just along for the ride. So I just want to get an idea, if you have any ideas or info about how does the coaching staff view the importance of landing Dylan? Because us as fans, I mean, obviously we're, beside ourselves that we got a 5-star recruit like that. And one of the biggest ones we've gotten in a while, but kind of get your curious on what you think the views of the coaching staff are of that importance of that land.
Well, I guess first of all, if Dylan Raiola is Luke Skywalker, then his dad would be Darth
we discussed this, but Anakin was a good man. All right. He was a good man. He just was tempted and seduced by the dark side. He came back. He's good again.
We've never suggested that Dominic Raiola went to the dark side. We've never suggested that.
Okay.
No,
be clear.
I'm just seeing how far that analogy went, but no, it's
we went out of our way to specify that. In fact.
Okay, great. You guys are all over it.
Absolutely.
But no, I think, Glenn Thomas was asked about it. He's like, I'm not even going to even bring it up to Dylan. I think Matt Rhule has talked with him about it and just said, be an 18-year-old, like do your thing. Don't worry about it. Sometimes that's easier said than done. I think if you see like a future where Dylan Raiola settles right in and takes off with the job and handles all the pressure that comes with being the Nebraska quarterback, I think that starts with his own upbringing and the fact that Dom, his dad was in the NFL for, close to a decade, and that he, that Dylan grew up around some of Dom's old quarterbacks. I think Matthew Stafford and some others that he was able to rub elbows with, train with, talk with, and when you have a guy like that in Dylan who's coming in, like college football suddenly isn't the biggest thing in the world because he's been around professional athletes and former professional athletes his entire life. Yeah. And so, it's certainly a different thing when you're the guy and you are in the thick of it. But Dylan's been going to national showcases and major 5-star camps and things like that for 3 or 4 years. He's played high school football in Arizona and in Georgia and, has been around high-level athletes too. So I think when you mix sort of what he's gone through physically, just in terms of the competition, and the fact that he's grown up around people who have set him right mentally, I think that all really adds up to something special. And I think, I think that's honestly part of what makes a 5-star a 5-star. It's not just physical ability, but what are the intangibles? And kind of like I mentioned earlier, it's no coincidence that he was the second guy after Matt Rhule to talk to a number of these transfers, and that he has a vision for the program. And I think it resonates too that he decided he didn't want to go to Georgia and be another cog in an all-star team, but he wanted to start a legacy and do something different somewhere else. To me, that suggests a different way of thinking. That suggests somebody who's not just looking for the easiest path to the NFL, but looking to be great now. And I think that's exactly the kind of thing Nebraska wants. I think we talked about Matt Rhule and kind of his comfort in the Fishbowl. I think Dylan Raiola kind of has some of those vibes. You see him out interacting with the crowds and all this. So I think all that kind of comes together it's just as much between the ears as is the physical stuff. And I think, at least on the outside, what he's showed so far, it's a lot of encouragement that this could go smoother, maybe than some other quarterbacks at other schools.
Awesome.
Heisman next year.
Hope so.
Got it. Heard you loud and clear. Heisman next year. Got it. Thank you.
Well, great stuff, Evan. And I have one thing that I've been curious about before we move on to our special waiver period of the show where we talk about baseball. We've had Michael Severe on, we've had Tom Chattel on, and some Nebraska, kind of press members. And I thought about this after we had them on. So I'm just curious. I know I've seen a little bit of rumblings over the years of what we talk about. Let me preface this with, we talk about food quite a bit on this podcast. We love food. I'm just curious, on game day in the press box, I've seen little rumblings, and the one day they'll have chili and cinnamon rolls, one day they'll have something else. What is your favorite thing that has been served in the press box, and what is your least favorite thing that's been served in the press box?
Well, first of all, I don't know how in depth you guys want to go on some of this stuff, but
as deep as
as
you want.
in depth as you want.
All ears, baby.
So I have nothing against Valentinos, the institution, but when you have it every single week, twice a week at the press conference on Monday, and then as well as post game on football games, the novelty of it wears off fairly quickly. So like, I'm in a period between, I think, December 1st and the end of fall camp. I'm not touching Valentinos. Like, I got to build up my tolerance for it again. So, and look, I'm very grateful that Nebraska put something out there. They don't have to do that, but like, that's a me issue that I continue to work through. But game days, they do have different meals, usually late in the year. If it's Iowa in Lincoln, or if it's another November game, that's when they do the chili and cinnamon roll combo. They always befuddle the visiting media that come in and say, what is this? So that's always kind of fun. But, I think they have probably the chicken Parmesan would be the one where I pump my fist a little bit and say, okay. Let's do this. They have some fresh veggies on the side, and some other side of some kind. So like, I would say the chicken Parmesan is probably my favorite. Every now and again on game day, they'll still throw out the pizza, and it's like, really? Like, let's shake it up a little bit. But so I would have to say the Vals would be the one where I emerge a little crestfallen, but give me the chicken Parmesan on the other end. And then at halftime, they set out, popcorn or some cookies, things like that. So I will say, we've joked about this before, like in the media, like it's like, how people say when you're in a casino, like you don't know what time it is, and you kind of do things there that like you wouldn't normally do in a setting. Press box is that way, but with food. Like, you could be like Colorado last year. We're at Colorado, and the game kicks off at 10 local time, Mountain Time, and you're up there and you're like, I want a soda, I want a cookie, I want a sandwich, and we have to stop and be like, at what other point in your day ever do you want these things? Are you seeking out a hot dog at 10 a.m.? Like, help. Like, we have to kind of hold each other accountable a little bit, because it's all sitting there. You have to have a little accountability, a little self-control there for sure.
Does every other, when you go to cover away games, can you expect food in every press box, or is that kind of a hit or miss kind of thing?
There's something, and some schools have good reputations and some don't.
What's the Big Ten school with the worst reputation?
Probably, in my opinion, this is my opinion, probably Wisconsin, which is kind of disappointing, because I think the state of Wisconsin has outstanding restaurant options.
They don't have like brats and cheese curds and spotted cow.
Come on.
You would think it's kind of hot dogs and sitting in lukewarm water, and it's little salads. It's just not great. I think Illinois would be my sleeper pick. They have little custard containers you can get, like vanilla or chocolate custard. They set out some New York style pizza. I think that's probably up there.
Do they have any tombstones?
No tombstone pizza, no.
All right. Well, last fall we were speculating that maybe Bert Bielema set fake Memorial Stadium on fire the week of the Nebraska game because he was watching film late at night, trying to figure out how he was going to stop the Heinrich Harburg led juggernaut, kind of stressing out. And he forgot his tombstones were in the oven and set the whole place on fire. We don't know. We haven't confirmed that yet. We kind of thought maybe that was
not confirmed.
Part of what happened at Illinois last
I'll
night.
look into that. Do some investigative journalism.
Please do. We would like to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, fantastic insight, Evan. If you have time, we'd love to ask you a couple of baseball questions.
Yeah, sure.
So the Husker baseball team starts 1-2 on the weekend. They win their opener against Baylor. I think everybody's pretty excited about that. And then they lose kind of 2 nail biters back to back. One against Texas Tech, which is a top 25 team, and then another one against our old friend, the Oklahoma Sooners. If you're correct me if I'm wrong. Did they go in the 9th tied against Texas Tech, and they went into the 9th up 1 against Oklahoma?
That's right.
And then they ended up losing both in the 9th. And so if you're a glass half full kind of person, you'd say, hey, they look good. They can probably play with some of the, anyone in the country. These are some of the best teams in the country, warm weather schools, that kind of thing. They just got to figure a few things out. If you're a glass half empty type of person, you look at the late inning meltdowns. We've certainly seen this before in given years, especially against Oklahoma. I think they had like a 3-run lead as late as the 6th or the 7th inning, something like that. And they're leading going into the 9th, and maybe a little down on the team. So just kind of, what's your early impression of the Nebraska baseball team? What'd you see? I assume you were there in person this last week?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
What'd you kind of see? What's your takeaway?
I get it. Like, I got a lot of reaction after the Oklahoma game about, here we go again, and failures, part of the Will Bolt era and all this. I do think, you look under the hood just a little bit, and I think there's a lot of reason for optimism. I mean, again, like both games went into the 9th. Nebraska was a pitch away from beating Oklahoma. They were, a clutch hit away from beating Texas Tech. They 2-3 plays go a different way. They go 3-0 on the weekend, and everybody's, super excited about it. So like, I think I break it down into 2 things. I look at one, what was the situation with runners in scoring position, and they go 6 for 32 on the weekend. That's under 200. Even typically an average team in that category over the course of a season is going to hit 250. So like, that's like 2 more clutch hits. If Nebraska gets 2 more clutch hits over that weekend, they probably go 2-1, maybe they go 3-0. And so that's going to even out. Like, that's part of that's just baseball. They didn't get a couple hits to fall. They had some liners to defenders in a tight game. Like, that's the kind of thing that can make a difference. So I think that's one. And then I think the other thing is this is a deeper pitching staff than they had a year ago. Through 3 games, their ratio of strikeouts to free passes, walks, and hit batters was like 1-to-1, which is terrible. You don't want to do that. This year, through 3 games, it's like at a 3-to-1 ratio. It was like 20-5. So like, that's really good, and you can build on that. And so I think some of it's about figuring out roles for guys. Like, I don't think maybe the guy who started on Sunday for Nebraska, I wonder if he's going to start for Nebraska next weekend. Some of the players they brought in late in high leverage spots, I don't know if those are going to be the same guys next weekend. So the staff, or the coaching staff's been pretty upfront about saying they feel like they have depth, but they don't know necessarily how the roles all figure out. And so a weekend like this really tells you, hey, these are the guys in the circle of trust. These are the guys who maybe need to earn that in the midweek a little bit more. And sometimes guys who shine in scrimmages and in workouts, it doesn't always translate to the game. That's just kind of how it is. So I think you're going to see them kind of figure out who they can trust a little bit better. You get a few more clutch hits, and I think you can take off still with this team. I think there's a lot of positives. Obviously, you wish they could have done a little bit better just for RPI purposes. Those are games that would have been really helpful for them to have for the selection committee in May. But you still got 53 scheduled regular season games to go. So there's still a lot of opportunity to move forward.
Yeah. I mean, after winning the Big Ten in 2021, I think everyone was kind of like, okay, we're just gonna run the Big Ten when it comes to baseball. And then they kind of, took a steps back for a couple of years. And then, it seems like would love to hear your take on this, but it seems like Coach Bolt has kind of been really intentional about making some changes this year. Overhauled the roster. I didn't recognize a ton of the names just from kind of following on Twitter over the weekend. And obviously, old friend Rob Childress is back as Nebraska's pitching coach. I mean, that's a hugely valuable asset in that dugout, given his experience and the success that he's had. But what are they doing differently? Or I mean, would you say they've sort of intentionally altered their approach a little bit here?
Oh yeah, a little bit. I think offensively, you're going to see less power, and you're going to see more kind of what we saw this weekend, like hit and runs, steals, trying to manufacture runs and putting the pressure on defense. I think that's the sort of offense they had in 21 when they won the Big Ten. So they're going back to that a little bit. I have thought that the key for Nebraska for a long time, like when you look at some of the best teams in college baseball, like the very best teams are going to have stars and they're going to have a ton of depth. Nebraska has often had stars, but they have struggled, I think, finding a lot of depth, especially when it comes to pitching over the years. Even in years when they've gone to regionals and they get into that third or fourth game and you're like, who are they going to throw? Like, how are they going to piece this together? And you don't know. To me, that was the thing coming into this year, because Nebraska was not close to being an at-large team last year. And you look at what they lost. They lost a first-round draft pick, a second-round draft pick, and 2 starting pitchers who went in the top 10 rounds. That's really good. That's like the best draft haul Nebraska's had in 15 years. And what did it get them? It didn't get them a ton because they had nobody to throw in the midweek, and they didn't feel great about their Sunday starter until midway through the season, and it was too late by then. So, like, to me, the question was less about who's going to be your ace or who's going to be your big bat, and it was more about, do you have enough depth to feel good about your Tuesday and your Wednesday guys? Do you have enough depth that you can put in an outfielder or another bat to give a guy a day off and like you don't drop off too much? And I think they do. So like, to me, it's about roster spots 21 to 40 as much as it is spots 1 to 20. And I do think that they've shown that there's more depth there, and that's come through recruiting. That's come through a little bit of more of a focus on NIL. I think that's come through, quite honestly, people wanting to play for Rob Childress, especially on the pitching side. I mean, there have been half a dozen pitchers who've committed and are now on the team directly because he's the pitching coach. So I think you add all that up, and we'll see. We'll have to see how that plays out. I think Grand Canyon this weekend is a really interesting case study, because it is 4 games, and if you have the depth, like, that's when it shows up in those last couple of games. So that to me is what I would watch. Like, if I'm a common baseball fan, like, how do they do in the midweek? How do they do when their stars aren't on the mound? How does that compare with what the other team's putting out there?
For sure. Well, that should be interesting. I know I don't claim to know a ton of what's going on here and what's happened in the offseason in the Big Ten baseball wise, but I did see over the weekend a top 25 and was kind of surprised to see Iowa in there. So, I guess the competition to me is definitely stiffer in the Big Ten than I had ever assumed it would be. Like TJ mentioned 2021, and, going back to when we joined the Big Ten, it was like, oh my God, we are going to dominate the Big Ten. We're going to win the Big Ten every single year. And it just hasn't really worked out. I mean, Indiana's had a few good years. Michigan's had a few good years. Do you think this year that Nebraska has a shot to win the Big Ten?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think they have a shot every year, quite honestly, just because of the resources that they put toward the sport that not a lot of other teams do. Iowa kind of is getting there. Their field isn't anything close to what Haymarket Park is. Indiana is somewhat comparable. Michigan is somewhat comparable, but like, just in terms of the resources and certainly in terms of the attendance and the fan interest, Nebraska should be in that upper middle class every year. The year that they didn't go in 22, they didn't go to the Big Ten tournament. That's a disaster. Like, that's the low bar needs to be making the Big Ten tournament, top 8, just because of the things that you put toward that. And it's been, the last few years have been different with the transfer portal coming out of the pandemic. It's been more commonplace every year to turn over like half your roster. That was never the case before. You're usually trading out 10 to 12 guys. Now you're talking like 25. every year, and you're having to rebuild. And so I think you've seen a little bit more parity in the Big Ten because of that. But you talk about when they joined back in 2011. Like back then, the Big Ten was a one bid baseball league. Like they get one team into the tournament every year, and that league has grown in part because of the football money. So like you get the major television deals that the Big Ten struck, and that money sort of flows off into other sports. And so I think you've seen that growth in the sport in part because of the money that has come from football. And then you add Maryland and Rutgers, who have been pretty good baseball members over the last few years too. So it's been a league that's changed a lot since Nebraska's there, kind of similar to football in a lot of ways. But yeah, I think the standard still needs to be, at the very least, you need to be playing meaningful baseball in May. You need to be in that at-large conversation so that you don't have to win the Big Ten tournament just to make the tournament every year.
Right. Well, now adding the 4 Pac-12 schools too is going to kind of, I would think, bolster Big Ten baseball a little bit too. So it's going to be very interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah, it will be interesting. I wonder how much those schools will bring the Big Ten up versus how much the league will bring those schools down. Because I think we saw that with Nebraska a little bit, quite honestly, where you thought they were going to kind of run roughshod through the Big Ten. And I think you kind of found that, recruits aren't as excited about playing Purdue and Northwestern as they are going to Texas or playing A&M or Oklahoma. So like, I'll be curious, if you're a West Coast kid, like, do you want to as much go to UCLA knowing that half the time you're traveling 2 time zones away to play in cold weather in March? Like, I don't know. I think that'll be a really interesting thing to see, kind of which way, who adjusts to who when it comes to that.
Matty O's a big Pac-12 After Dark fan in the fall. Matt, would you watch Big Ten baseball after dark on Saturdays in March?
Absolutely, I would, TJ. Absolutely.
Oh, outstanding. All right, Evan, you've been more than generous with your time. Matt, Jeff, any final questions for our distinguished guest here today?
No, sir. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Evan.
I wanted to just a quick recap, just so the common fans know what we all hit on today and covered. We're running the table next year in football. Raiola is winning the Heisman Trophy. Dominic is not Darth Vader, just to make that abundantly clear. And Valentino's pizza can kind of get a little bit old, and let's be honest, it's a little overpriced too.
Wow, you said it, man.
Yeah, Evan did not say that.
Jeff has certain George Costanza-like traits. That's all I'll say.
It's overpriced. It's not a lie if you believe it. That's right.
That's right.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Evan. He is at Evan Bland OWH on Twitter. Husker fans, common fans, but great follow if you're not following him already for all your Husker news. Really appreciate your time, Evan. Enjoy. Are you going to? Is it in Arizona, the baseball weekend, and is it at Grand Canyon?
It is at Grand Canyon. I will not be there. I will be watching on ESPN Plus, like the common fan.
There you go.
Love
He's a
it.
common fan like all of us.
One of us.
All right. Well, thanks again, Evan. We'll be back at you soon, common fans. In the meantime, GBR for life.